spaces, a space believed to have the power to aid in salvation or spiritual liberation. Okay. So I kind of bring in that renunciatory phase to dovetail with Varanasi as a salvific space. So salvific spaces are believed to facilitate moksha, liberation from the cycle of birth and rebirth. And these spaces are more than just sacred. They are thought to possess intrinsic spiritual power capable of accelerating one's journey to liberation. Such salvational powers are associated with many sites, the most significant one being the city of Kashi or Varanasi. Kashyam Maranam Mukti, that is, death in Kashi is liberation, elucidates the city's essence. In Varanasi, Lord Shiva is said to whisper the salvific mantra in the ear of the dying and they attain liberation. The pursuit of salvific goals is thus one of the primary reasons for undertaking a pilgrimage to Kashi, among the many others. But this particular goal attracts mostly older individuals seeking moksha. So Kashi is not just a physical location but a metaphysical gateway to liberation. So it then therefore represents a kind of confluence of life, death and eternity, making it a pilgrimage destination unlike any other, where people do not just visit to worship but live on to die in hope of attaining moksha. So, why? The desire for salvation is therefore a central motive behind pilgrimages to Kashi, particularly for those in the later stages of life. For many Hindus, who hope to die and attain moksha, Kashi thus becomes a one-way journey, a conscious relinquishment of worldly attachments in anticipation of spiritual release. So for some people, it is cremation and immersion of ashes in the Kashi, in the Ganga. Okay, but for some others, there is another way, and that is what I focus on now. They choose to live out their final days in the city, surrendering their bodies and lives to its sanctity. This belief has led to the establishment of the Moksha Bhavanas or the Moksha Bhavanas, which is what I focus on now, which are special hospices where the elderly and terminally ill reside, awaiting death within the sacred geography of Kashi. These spaces embody the Hindu understanding that liberation is not solely a matter of belief or behavior but also of place, that the geography of the sacred can become a geography of transcendence. Now, these hospices, which cater specifically to the mumukshus, that is, those who seek liberation, are very interesting sociological sites. Now, one such institution that I focus on for a specific reason is the Kashi La Mukti Bhavan, located near the Asi Ghat area. It was established to provide accommodation to elderly individuals who arrived in Varanasi with the intention of making it their final resting place, guided by the hope that death in this sacred city will bring about moksha. These individuals, when they sense that death is near, come to Kashi to detach themselves from worldly bonds, both emotional and material, in accordance with the Hindu ideals that we just talked about, that view detachment as necessary for successful spiritual departure. These Mukti Bhavans serve as contemporary sanctuaries for ancient Hindu ideals, offering a space where the quiet introspection of the Vanaprastha stage converge with the ultimate renunciation of the Sannyasa stage, all in pursuit of liberation. Now, the act of residing in these salvation homes to die in the holy city and attain moksha reflects the core ethos of Vanaprastha and Sannyasa. Okay, let me just elaborate this a little more and then come to the next phase. So, Vanaprastha as the preparatory stage for dying forms the guiding principle for Kashivas. Okay, the practice of settling in Kashi to await death. In principle, the ideals of Kashivas discourage the formation of new social ties, as such attachments are viewed as impediments to the renunciatory path of spiritual liberation. So this is the ethos behind the stays in these mukshu bhavans. However, the theoretical ideals prescribed by Hindu philosophy often stand in stark contrast to their practical realization in these mukti bhavans. This tension between philosophical doctrine and lived experience is what I wanted to focus on in terms of the experience of aging within Hindu tradition in contemporary times. And for that, the one text that I've chosen is a cinematic text called Mukti Bhavan, which illustrates how old age, as envisioned in Hinduism through the Vanaprastha and Sannyasa stages, is often significantly removed from its practical enactment. So the film becomes a kind of cultural text, a cultural summary of how emotions, familial bonds, and the complexities of modern life continually challenge the abstract ideals of detachment, offering a very reflective commentary on the contradictions embedded in the spiritual journey towards moksha. And that is what I briefly highlight on now. Do I have around 15 minutes more? 10 minutes? Okay. So this film, Mukti Bhavan, a 2017 film by Subhashish Bhutiani, is set against the landscape of Varanasi and draws inspiration from the real life tradition of older individuals journeying to this sacred space to await death and their family members bringing them and staying with them to facilitate the process. So the narrative centers on Daya, a man in the twilight of his life who experiences a sudden and intuitive sense that his end is near. Convinced that dying in Varanasi will grant him moksha, he insists on traveling to Mukti Bhavan, the guest house that I just mentioned. Okay. His son Rajiv, like so many of us, caught up in the dynamics of the world, reluctantly accompanies him, taking a break from his demanding urban job. Now, this is the spiritual premise, but beneath this spiritual premise is also a depiction of Gaya's growing disconnection, not only from the world, but also from the very family he once held together. At its core, the film therefore becomes a very subtle and poignant portrayal of the invisible burdens of aging, and the decision to go to Varanasi becomes very different from what it structurally is versus what it is in spirit. So, though physically present in his family home, Daya is, emotionally and spiritually displaced. His presence is tolerated more than cherished. And I'm not going into the details, just summarizing, but I think you get a drift of this because this is something that is, fairly common in experience. His thoughts are displaced, his routines are seen as mild inconveniences. Okay, and in this context, Daya's desire to go to Varanasi transcends religious or philosophical motivation. It becomes a kind of personal rebellion and an emotional escape. Right. So, by choosing to leave home for Mukti Bhavan, Daya asserts his agency, stepping away from life in which he feels invisible and unwanted, and the Kashivas model becomes a kind of alibi for this journey. So there is the literal journey, and there is also the symbolic journey to reclaim dignity in the face of emotional neglect. That is highlighted. When he comes to the home, away from the home where he had to grapple with loneliness and the sense for autonomy. Okay, which is of course an experience increasingly shared by older individuals today. What is highlighted is the idea of loneliness and loneliness as being conflated with solitude, something I'll just explore briefly in a couple of minutes. So, Mukti Bhavan in Varanasi is Daya's place to die, but ironically, it becomes a space where he is finally recognized, heard, and seen in ways that he wasn't for the time that he had become. Shortly after his arrival, Daya forms friendships and finds a confidant in a long-term resident Vimla, whose presence offers solace in his final days. His quiet companionship with Vimla brings into his life humor, wisdom, and calm. So the Salvation House becomes a sanctuary, fostering, not isolation but a sense of community, and not emotional detachment but emotional support amongst the peers who share the same ultimate goal. And thus the film, becomes a kind of modern reinterpretation of the traditional Hindu view of old age and moksha, subtly challenging the long-standing notion that liberation must be achieved through isolation, renunciation, and ascetic withdrawal. This is compounded by, of course, the ageism that they are experiencing. In classical Hindu philosophy, the final stages of life are typically envisioned as periods of solitude, contemplation, detachment, and moksha as a solitary journey inward. But in contemporary society, these ideals prove often difficult to realize. The literal withdrawal to a forest is no longer feasible. Instead, these stages must be reimagined in terms of inner maturity, acceptance, and reflective solitude. Now, there is also a section about caregiving and the family system, which I'm not going into. I'll just kind of give you 2 or 3 examples to illustrate what I'm saying. That although Rajiv beautifully accompanies Daya to Varanasi, thinking that his father is almost about to die, as his father, becomes more alive, in a different sense in Varanasi, Rajiv is seen asking the hospice manager, और कितना दिन लगेगा? So that kind of that one thing symbolizes the tensions that are there here. Okay. So it is a kind of desire to hasten the process, betraying a kind of emotional exhaustion behind the underneath the veneer of beauty. Something which must not be taken either negatively or otherwise, but as a fact that exists. Now, so the idea, there are tensions between the idea of filial seva and lived reality. And the film invites viewers to reflect on this dissonance. How the ethics of caregiving, while revealed in theory, often blur into obligation, impatience, and even a subconscious yearning for relief, not from the parent, but from the burden of the responsibility that is there on them. So this very quiet narrative, that is the word to use for this film. Mukti Bhavan humanizes the philosophical journey towards moksha, the ideal journey, complicating the binaries of renunciation and attachment, beauty and fatigue, solitude and community, to offer a tender, contemporary reflection on aging dignity and the search for meaning in life. Now, quick final words. So, the film also gently reminds us, or rather reframes, moksha as not the product of isolation, but as something that may also be found in companionship, empathy, and shared vulnerability if we choose to look at it that way. It does not dismantle the Hindu vision of the end of life, but rather adapts it to new social realities, just like the adaptations that I talked of when we began with the paper. Of the first stage model initially not being there, the idea of old age coming in, and then the models being reframed in terms of old age. So perhaps there is a kind of need for that. So this evolving vision reflects a larger shift in the spiritual and emotional consciousness of aging individuals today, which this four-stage model probably needs to be in dialogue with. While the sacred ideals of Hinduism continue to offer guidance and aspiration, and the practicalities of modern life, urbanization, nuclear families, professional obligations demand a rethinking of how these ideals are lived. Now, instead of viewing these as divergences, as failures or dilutions, it can be seen as a creative negotiation between timeless spiritual goals and the pressing needs of the present. In the gap between classical prescriptions and modern day conditions, new forms of meaning making emerge, ones that honor both the inner journey of the soul as well as the outer realities of human connection and care. I end with this.
Thank you, Professor Mantha. A wonderful presentation in which he actually talked about a complex of ideas, one merging into another. And these are all interconnected. For me, someone who is not familiar with Hindu philosophy and Hindu spiritualism, I, for a long time, felt Varanasi to be an interesting place, an interesting space. Because I was for some time engaged with Kalapani crossings, with the endangered labor movements, and I found that Varanasi, Kashi had always been the source of interest for the Arkatis. Arkatis collected women from there and sent across the seas. So for me, it was that kind of a place. So in addition to spiritualism, it had other kinds of importance as well. As I understood the presentation, the significance of the presentation, Varanasi or Kashi, and more at the nuclear level, the salvation houses. These, for me, are all places, both places and spaces. Spaces in the sense that certain cultural values were practiced therein, social and cultural values. Now, as I saw his presentation was basically on aging and how the place gradually transforms from old sites of spiritualism and waiting for death and moksha. Things gradually are changing. As I was listening to him, I was thinking of Van Gennep's idea of the passage of life, passage of rites of passage. In rites of passage, Van Gennep obviously felt that the limits, these places where the transformation changed actually. In every part of the life, where the changes occur, these are invariably accompanied by certain rites. So Kashi is also a place, Varanasi is also a place where certain rites and rituals are performed. You find in the space and the place of Varanasi, not only the cremation ground, not only the river, not only the pilgrimage, the desired site of visit, but also within that place, the salvation houses or hospices or whatever you call it. connotation changes with the names that you use. Vriddhashram is often used with negative connotations, but moksha house or salvation houses acquire different kind of connotations. So you see, Professor Mahanto has delineated the lives of the ashramas, okay, where certain cultures, certain rites were practiced. But what is interesting is that he ended with the changes that is visible. The salvation places are being also used as places of resistance. Or at least the place people go there, it is a very gendered place, and people go there, women go there either for shelter from a horrendous kind of a life, and some kind of agency can be acquired there within that particular space. So with modernity, with the incoming of modernity, the changes that are taking place in the society at large, things are also changing. He ends with certain examples. The narratives point out towards that. With this, I would like to stop here and I would like to take 2 or 3 questions. Please.
Based on the discussion by Professor Mahatma and Professor Lahiri, it's not really a question. I was wondering if these moksha houses, they have been given meaning and agency by their spiritual foundation. So if we talk about the old age homes from a negative perspective, these moksha houses definitely, we can look at it more positively, they have more agency. So perhaps it is not a matter of resignation in the old age, but reinventing the self in the old age. Right? Is that what we are looking at? Reinventing the self instead of resigning the self. Something that we see in the old age homes, but that is a very different way of looking at life in these moksha houses where